Southern Gothic is a podcast that explores the history behind the American South's darkest days, greatest mysteries, and most chilling ghost stories. But today, we aren't hitting the history books. We're going to go down to the Campfire for our annual Halloween tradition of 13 spooky tales over the course of 13 nights. Happy Sunday, y'all. I hope you're having a really nice weekend. And for that reason, I figured why not, before the next week starts, we go out to the beach for a little campfire story today. Get a little rest and relaxation down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. That is, if getting spooked is relaxing for you. Well, that being said, today's campfire story takes place on Deer Island, a beautiful 400-acre island located just off the coast of Biloxi, Mississippi. In fact, this is the closest island to the land on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. But it's not a barrier island, it's actually a remnant of the mainland that was separated by the rising sea level. Now, over the years, folks have used Deer Island for a number of things, but today it is a public park and a wildlife refuge open to the public for fishing, bird watching, and boating. But y'all know I ain't here to tell you about how pretty Deer Island is today, right? Because as exquisite as this uninhabited island is, it is also purportedly home to a couple of ghosts, spirits that have apparently been seen here for over 2 centuries. One night back in the early 1800s, a couple of fishermen decided to head out to Deer Island under the light of the moon. When they arrived, they set up camp, built a fire, and started to cook a bit of food for themselves. But soon enough, they started to hear a noise out in the shadows. Since the men thought they were alone out there, at first they just assumed it was some type of animal, like a wild hog scurrying around in the palmetto bushes. But soon enough, that sound began to grow louder and louder, and it started to seem as if it was getting closer and closer. Well, of course, now they absolutely decided to get up and investigate, and when they did, they came face to face with a fully animated skeleton standing directly in front of them. A skeleton without a skull. Shocked by the sight, they attempted to slowly retreat, hoping to quietly escape this bizarre figure that had just confronted them. But the headless skeleton followed. So the fishermen dropped everything, turned and rushed back to their boat, jumping inside and heading out to the sea for safety, leaving all of the supplies that they had brought with them. Well, the following morning, after they gathered their wits, the men decided to return to their campsite from the night before and maybe try to get their stuff back. But according to legend, when they arrived, they found more than just their things. They found gold coins stashed away near where the skeletons had emerged from the shadows. So later, when they got home and started telling folks what they had seen and what they found, it became clear to everyone around Biloxi who those fishermen met on that fateful night. That headless skeleton was all that remained of a long-forgotten pirate. You see, decades before, when Biloxi was nothing more than a little French settlement out on the Gulf Coast, the crew of a local pirate ship decided to bury their stolen loot there on Deer Island. But when the captain asked his men who'd like to stay and guard the treasure, an inexperienced pirate made an awful, fatal mistake and volunteered for this duty. But just as quickly as the words left his mouth, "I'll guard the treasure," the captain swung his cutlass and took the boy's head clear off. The body of that pirate was then dumped in the bushes near the treasure, and the crew sailed away. As for his spirit, those fishermen found out the boy's true fate. But according to folks in Mississippi, these men weren't even the first to come face to face with him. Well, face to not face. And they certainly have not been the last. In fact, reports of this very encounter was first documented all the way back in May of 1922 by a reporter named Anthony Ragusan in a column he wrote under the pseudonym Mr. Tony. The headline read, "Headless Ghost Haunted Deer Island in Olden Times." Well, this article that's now over 100 years old claimed that the tale of the headless skeleton had been around for over 100 years by the time it was published, making the story itself over 2 centuries old today. It seems that this legend of the headless skeleton has been passed down from generation to generation, but y'all, it's still just as prominent as it's ever been. Of course, that wasn't all the article claimed. It said that this wasn't even the only spirit out there on Deer Island. There's another that's come to be known as the firewater ghost. Mr. Tony wrote that for years men claimed to see this illuminated spirit out on the water at night, an apparition that he described as a, quote, mystic object that moved along the water in the shape of a ball of fire. What the firewater ghost is or was is entirely unknown, but fishermen have continued to see it for well over a century, and some believe that it might just be one of their own, a boat captain who's gotten lost out there in the Gulf and has been searching for his way back home ever since. And that light, that glowing orb, is his lantern, his only hope to be found. Of course, today, you can take a water taxi out to Deer Island, but if you plan on staying there at night, maybe take your own boat so you've got a way home, just in case that headless pirate decides you're a threat to his loot. And if he does, maybe don't follow any blue lights you might see on the water on your way back. Southern Gothic is an independent podcast produced by siblings Brianne and Brandon Schexnayder. And this mini episode was part of our annual Campfire Stories, a series to get you in the spirit for Halloween. We'll be back with an all-new full-length episode on October 31st. So y'all stick around if you dare.